story that must be told. Here's a little story that must be told. Here's a little story. Here's a little story.
My name is Glen Boyd, sometimes known as Shockmaster Glen Boyd, and I was born and raised right here in Seattle. A Shockmaster, that's a good question. The way that I got the name was when they started a hip-hop show at KCMU, and mine was the first. It was called Shock Frequency. And I did come up with that name. Don't ask me where I came up with it, but that's the name I came up with. I originally wanted to call it Play That Funky Music White Boy, but they said, no, I probably shouldn't call it that. So I said, okay. So I called it Shock Frequency. I was known already kind of throughout the community as having Music Menu just down the road on 23rd and Rainier. But I also covered hip-hop for the Rocket magazine. So Robert Newman, the guy who first wrote about hip-hop and basically said, recruited me to write about hip-hop for the Rocket. My first show on Shock Frequency, he was my first call-in. And he called in and he said, hey, Glenn, it's Robert. And I was like, hey, what's up, Robert? And he said, so, Shock Frequency, huh? And I said, yeah. And he goes, I guess that makes you the Shockmaster. So, hence, Shockmaster Glen Boyd was born. I started at Penny Lane Records in Tacoma. I was the manager of that store. Managed that from 1980 to 1984. And this happened to coincide with the time that hip-hop was basically becoming a thing. And at that time, it wasn't quite the big thing it eventually became. It was still pretty underground. We had a largely military clientele. And people from all over the country wound up in Tacoma because their military orders brought them to Tacoma. So those were my customers. So my customers coming in from all these places like Washington, D.C., New York, coming in to see, long-haired white kid behind the counter. And it's like, hey, do you got any Trouble Funk? Do you got any Grandmaster Flash? Do you got any Funky 4+1 More? And I'm like, who are these people? And they're like, well, this is what we listen to back east. And, it would have been one thing if it was one or two people asking those questions, but it was a whole lot of people asking those questions. And I didn't know what hip-hop was. My customers educated me on that. So basically, I made it a point to go out and get those records. And the way that I did it was I went into Billboard magazine, and I just read all the ads in Billboard. It's like, who's selling these records? Who's distributing these records? And the main place that I relied on at first was a place called Tape King, and they were out of New York. Tape King was like the big hip-hop distributor out of New York at the time. So I went into, I basically wrote them and I said, hey, I got this record store out in Tacoma, Washington. Can I set up an account with you guys? Believe me, I'll buy lots of stuff from you. And so long story short there, Penny Lane grew to where people came from all Vancouver, Portland, Yakima, Washington, all over the place, because we were known as the place that had the records. The guy who had Tower Records, who was the 12-inch buyer there, he would come up to see me saying, "What should I buy?" Everybody talks about Penny Lane, so that's where it started. That led to me writing for the Rocket. And I wrote about several articles because people were starting to hear about the Tacoma hip-hop scene, which was kind of a thing before the Seattle hip-hop scene. And they would bring stacks of rockets out to the store and leave them there. And Robert would come out and he goes, so tell me about this Tacoma hip-hop scene. What's going on? And we talked. And he said, you should write about it. And I said, well, I do have a journalism background. I went to college, and I love writing about music. And he says, yeah, write some articles for us. So I wrote about WizKid, and I wrote about there was another pretty well-known DJ down there who was more local to Tacoma, a guy named Cooley High. There was Cooley High, there was Galaxy, there was Jammin' Green, there was TV Lee. There was two guys who went by Roots. One guy was Roots 1 and one guy was Roots 2. And basically the whole scene revolved around the military clubs. Basically just played hip hop at the military clubs, and they'd just pack them out every weekend, and those DJs were all buying their records from us. When I started writing about it for the Rocket, basically at that point, and I'd already befriended a lot of the local DJs back then. Just I got along with everybody really good because I was getting them all the records they wanted, so they all loved me. I was kind of an unwilling celebrity working at Penny Lane because I was the kind of the colorful character that got everybody the records. So the DJ started saying, "Hey, why don't you come out? Why don't you come out to one of our gigs on Friday night and like give away records?" And okay. So I went out there, and a spotlight would be on. "Hey, we got Glen from Penny Lane in the house. He's giving away records." So when I was doing that, it's like I got a chance to watch what they did. And it got to the point where at Penny Lane, we would actually have DJs, like WizKid would come in and do like a DJ exhibition. And we'd pack the place out for that. And I watched how they were slicing records in between the two turntables and doing all the stuff with the phase shifting and all that. I'm like, damn, there's actually an art to this. I mean, there is a real frickin' art to this. At that point, I was all in. I just dove in head first. When I'm listening to De La Soul, 3 Feet High and Rising, for example, I'm going, oh, look, there's something by the Turtles. Oh, look, there's something by Chicago Transit Authority. Saturdays by De La Soul off the second record. They're taking Grease and mixing it with Grease from the soundtrack and mixing it with Saturday in the Park by Chicago. That's ingenious. It's like, who thinks of that shit? Yeah, I was all in. I was like, yeah, this is revolutionary. This is new. This is not just about one thing. It has all these different facets and aspects to it. And yeah, I was all in. We're on the early part of something. We're part of pioneering something that is going to be around for a long, long, long time. We're making history right now. And I sensed it while it was happening. And I remember when at the label, do you guys realize that, promoting these records, we're doing what they did at Motown back in the 60s. We're pioneering hip hop music. It's like, you guys got to realize this. You're part of history. I mean, when you've got something so good and you want to share it. You want to share it with the world. Yeah. Hip hop changed everything. Fashion, music, politics, culture. I mean, everything. It impacted everything. So around this same time, there was Music Menu down here on 23rd and Rainier. And Ray Watson was the guy who owned it. So I'd run into Ray Watson at where we all got our records in Seattle at a place called General Record Service. I'd go down there to pick up records. He'd be down there picking up records for Music Menu. We'd talk and talk and talk and talk. Long story short, Ray said, "Come save my record store. I'll pay you twice whatever Willie's paying you at Penny Lane." So I said okay, and I went down and I took over Music Menu. When I went in there. There was no inventory. There was a building. And basically he said, "Here's $1,000. Just buy whatever you want." And I started there and I built Music Menu into what it was. What came after that was KCMU. And that came about because Faith Hemschel, who was the music director of KCMU, basically said, we're getting a lot of pressure to do a black show, basically. And, who do we know that can do a black show? And everybody said, well, Glen's the guy that writes about it for the Rocket, and he's got Music Menu. So they said, okay, get a hold of this Glen guy. And so Glen guy went and did the radio show at KCMU. When we had Music Menu down here, there was a rival record store that came into play at one point called Beverly's. They were a pretty significant rival to us at one time. So the guy that owned Beverly's was this guy named Terry Morrison. And Beverly's was up in the Promenade 23 shopping mall up on 23rd and Jackson. He opened his record store, and for some reason, he just had the biggest heart-on in the world for Music Menu. He was just like, we're going to put them out of business. Blah, 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 blah. So anyway, we finally decided, okay, we got to do something. We got to do something about this guy. It's just getting to be too much. I'm tired of hearing people coming down saying, hey, I was up at Beverly's and then, Terry Morrison was up there talking shit about you guys again. So I said, okay, we got to do something. So Music Menu had this great big reader board that you drove down 23rd and Rainier one of the busiest intersections in Seattle. You couldn't miss our reader board. I was always putting cool stuff up on the reader board. So by this time, me and Ness were really good friends. And NWA they didn't have Straight Outta Compton out yet, but they had the 12-inch single of Dope Man and 8 Ball. And as a street record, that thing was freaking huge. And Ness was playing the censored version of it on K-Fox on Fresh Tracks, so that made the street buzz even bigger. But nobody could buy the record, and everybody was coming in. Where's NWA? To the point where I was telling Ness that Ness, quit playing the damn thing because we can't sell it. You're just making life miserable for us. So anyway, Ness had gotten to know Eazy-E and Dr. Dre and everybody, and so me and Ness patched this idea where it's like, okay, we're going to do an in-store with NWA at my store, which we did. We didn't advertise it. We did it strictly word of mouth, had them lined up around the block to meet NWA. But beyond that, because we did the in-store, the 12-inch single, which had not been commercially released yet, we were given it to us to sell. So we had something like 500 copies of this NWA single, and we had them lined up around whether they were there or not, they would have bought it because the street buzz on this thing was just huge. And so my capper there was with my reader board. What I put up on my reader board was, "We have NWA, they don't." Yeah, pretty good shit. And every car that went down 23rd and Rainier saw that billboard. You mess with the bull, you're going to get the horn, my man. Hip-hop culture in Seattle has always been a little weird. There's always been this kind of underdog aspect to it, a little bit of a chip on our shoulder, because, at least in the early days, we weren't getting the same respect. I mean, even when somebody like Sir Mix-a-Lot came along, he wasn't really getting the critical respect. He was selling records, but people were like, "Oh yeah, Sir Mix-a-Lot, MC Hammer, Vanilla Ice, one-hit wonder." Because I wrote for the Rocket, basically every kid in the neighborhood, I was just getting inundated with tapes. It was, "Oh, listen to my tape, listen to my tape." Most of it was shit, but there were a few that stood out. The Dyra Boys stood out. The Dyra Boys were really good. Incredi Crew with Danny D-Rock, he later became DJ Supreme. His stuff stood out. And plus, these guys were all customers of mine, too. But one of the people that stood out the most was Sir Mix-a-Lot. But the thing about Mix-a-Lot was he was also really persistent. I was hearing about him from everybody in the neighborhood anyway. But he just kept coming in, giving me tape after tape after tape. Let's G this, Seward Park that, all these songs he was doing. One day he came in and he goes, "Okay, Glenn, pop this into your cassette on the way home." So I'm going, okay, and I I'm a little jaded. It's like I'm getting all these tapes from all these people. So I'm driving home. I pop in the tape, and all of a sudden over my speakers in my car, "Glen boy, this is Sir Mix-a-Lot. I'm the computerized DJ. You need to listen to my music, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. I mean, he made this like special thing for me. So, and I listened to it and I said, okay, sold, and I wrote an article about him for the Rocket. And actually, even when I was trying to get Sir Mix-a-Lot featured in the Rocket, I had to really push for it. Basically, I went to the editor and I said, okay, this guy, Sir Mix-a-Lot, he's making some noise. And he's like, yeah, okay, so review his record, write a little, 700-word, feature. And I'm like, okay, and I did that. And then I came back and I said, this Posse on Broadway single, this is starting to sell some records. And they're like, okay, so what? It's like, well, I mean, like it's sold like 250,000 records. And they're like, "Oh, really?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Okay, well, when it charts on Billboard, come back and talk to us." And I go back, and I go, "Okay, it's charting on Billboard." And they go, "Okay, what chart?" And I go, "Well, the R&B chart." And they go, "Well, when it's charting on the pop chart, come back and talk to us." And then I came back, "Hey, it's charting on the pop chart." And it just went on. Hey, it just went gold. hey, it just went platinum. And it's like, okay, you win, you know. And around that same time, Ness was playing him on K-Fox, and by this time I'd met Ness as well. And then Ed Locke, who's now Sheila Locke, came into the picture with, he was the money guy. So he had he put Nasty Mix Records together, which the name, you know, Nastiness or Mix-a-Lot, Nasty Mix, that's where it came from. By that time, we'd all gotten to know each other pretty well. And they were like, well, somebody's got to do retail for us. You know, I was the retail guy. I had the store. Plus, I knew how the whole Billboard deal worked. The label person would call the record stores around the country and say, hey, report my record to Billboard, and, I'll give you some cleans or something. And so I knew how that worked. So basically they said, we need a guy to do that because we got to get our records out there. So I said, okay, I'll come work for you. When Mix-a-Lot left the label to go to Def American with Rick Rubin and everything, Mix-a-Lot, they basically brought me with them. When they went to Def American, they went to Rick and said, we want Glen to do our retail. And, I had to go through the interview process and everything. And by that time, I was already gone from Nasty Mix. And I'd interviewed with Tommy Boy before that. They flew me out to New York to talk to Tommy Boy. But I didn't do it because I didn't want to go to New York. And so basically Mix and Ricardo talked to Rick. And Dan Charnas was another part of that picture. I'd gotten to know Dan too, and he was already working for Rick. And so basically, long story short, they flew me down there, and Rick interviewed me at his house. He has a big polar bear, a big, like 7-foot tall polar bear in his house. Once I had gone to work for Rick, there are so many stories. That was 2 years, and I mean there is so much crammed into that 2 years. You just have no idea. When Rick produced Mick Jagger's, I think it was his third solo record, they had a party. A record release party for that, and basically some of us at the office were invited to go to it. So I was one of the people that was invited. Okay, so I'm driving up Mulholland through the Hollywood Hills, up this windy ass road, going up to find this place, and I finally get to the address, and there's a pathway of candles lit by candles that takes you into the inner sanctum of the address. It's outdoors. There's a bar set up outside, 2 big tents. There's like outdoor bathrooms where people are going to the bathroom. And I go to use the bathroom, and this guy stumbles out of the bathroom. He's wearing this rumpled like suit that you'd think he'd gotten at Kmart. He's got a drink in one hand, he's got a smoke in the other, and I take a closer look, and it's fucking Jack Nicholson. And I'm like, wow. And I didn't say it, but in my head I'm thinking, you're Jack Nicholson. But yeah, it's Jack Nicholson. Okay, so I walk out of there, and then I'm walking there. There's like a little pathway by a swimming pool, and that's the other thing. There's the gigantic swimming pool. You look over the swimming pool, you can see the whole view of like the San Fernando Valley. Beautiful. So I'm walking past there, and I look down, and here's sitting on this little gazebo. Here's Prince sitting here sucking on a lollipop, and he's got this gigantic bodyguard next to him. And you walk by him, and the bodyguard just glares at you like, nope. And I'm like, okay. I just kept walking. So okay, it gets better. Okay, so now I'm in line to get a drink, and it's outdoor bar. Line's like yay deep with people. Sitting here in this line, and behind me I hear this woman go, "Who do I have to blow to get a drink around here?" And I turned around, Cindy Crawford. I'm like, this is just frickin' nuts. This is getting more insane by the minute. So then I go to leave the party, and I go to find Rick. And by this time, I think it's about 2 a.m. And I go, hey Rick, nice party. I'm gonna go ahead and head out now. And behind me, I hear this, yeah, nice party, Rick. And I turn around, it was Mick. It was Mick Jagger. This is just frickin' nuts. When Baby Got Back came out, big record. I thought Posse on Broadway was big. You know, I was like, oh wow, you know, we sold we have a gold record. Cool. I had no idea how big Baby Got Back was. Then I went to the American Music Awards, where we won for Best Rap Song of the Year. So I went to the American Music Awards. I'm in the audience and sitting there with Mix. Lo and behold, we got the award. So that means the camera was shown on us. So I was sitting next to Mix. That means I was on camera in households across the United States. And when I got home that night, man, my phone had blown up. It was like I had 50 calls from people I knew in Seattle. I saw you on TV. You know, I mean, relatives. You know, Uncle Joe, you were on TV. So went to another awards show with Mick, and that was the MTV Music Awards. So after the MTV Music Awards, they had this big party afterwards. Howard Stern was broadcasting live. That I remember. Nirvana played there too, by the way. En Vogue comes up to us and starts flirting with Mix a lot. Mix thought that was great. But the other thing was Marky Mark. It was like Marky Mark was following us around like a freaking puppy dog. And he was like, oh yeah, Sir Mix-a-Lot, man, I love your shit, man. He was just he was like a pest. He was like, okay, go on, get out of here. He was just like this little vagabond, like pesty kid that was following us around. And when I tell people that, of course that's Mark Wahlberg. And it's like, yeah, Mark Wahlberg, big Hollywood movie star, before anybody knew who he was following us around like a freaking puppy dog. But I'm bringing all this up because not just with Sir Mix-a-Lot, but with hip-hop in Seattle in general, there was always this kind of feeling like we were being disrespected by the mainstream. The hip-hop movers and shakers, it took a long time for them to recognize that something was really happening in Seattle. Sir Mix-a-Lot was probably the first guy who really broke down that door, and maybe Macklemore kind of put a finer exclamation point on it. But once the rest of the world realized, okay, Seattle's for real, that was when Seattle hip-hop could finally just kind of relax and be itself. It got to a point where, we couldn't be disrespected anymore. It was that me against the world thing. When Run DMC and the Beastie Boys played the Paramount, the media went nuts. It was like every night on Como, King, Cairo. It was like, oh, the gangsters are coming to town. Lock up your kids. The gangsters are coming to town. There's going to be shootings. People are going to get killed at this shit. To a point where Ness and I, we were both invited to MC the show. Me and Ness went on the air together at K-Fox. And it was like, hey, this is Nasty Ness from K-Fox. This is Glen, or this is Shockmaster Glen Boyd from KCMU. We're the two rap DJs in town on the radio. And we're coming together to, make an appeal to our listenership for hip hop unity at these shows. Let's show the media that they're wrong. And I think it worked. And we emceed the show. And when we first came out, it was like there was still news cameras there, and there were literally helicopters flying over the place. And when you went down there, police with clubs and every street corner, cops everywhere. Police cars all lined up and down the road. I'm not making this up. This happened. This actually happened. So yeah, it was hysteria. So me and Ness came out there and we emceed the show together, and we said hey give yourselves a round of applause because you did it. We showed them that they're wrong, and the show went off basically without a hitch. And I'd like to think that maybe the media was a little embarrassed after that. My thing was just I love music, and whether it's hip hop or rock and roll or whatever it is. I mean, I just love music. I always just really got great personal satisfaction when I could turn somebody on to something that was really good. Whether it's behind the counter at a record store, whether it's playing it on the radio, whether it's writing about it in the Rocket. If I get really passionate about something, about a piece of music, I just really want to share it. It's just how I'm wired. So, do I have any illusions about, changing the world or anything? Hell no. I'm just Glenn, but I just really enjoy sharing great music. Have I given you too much, or?
It's so good. It's so good. I could listen to you all night.
All right. Well, thank you.